so much for joining, everybody. I'm really excited to be here talking to you about gear and climbing, two of my favorite things. So here's a bit of a structure for the hour we have together. I'll start with an intro, and then I'll talk about design and introduce Arc'teryx. I'll introduce the Sequence harness, which is our new climbing harness for Spring 20. It's just launched, and then there'll be time to end for a Q&A. So I started climbing when I was 8 years old and about 40 pounds. I loved the challenge of climbing, and it made me feel strong. I had this really amazing community. I was part of the team actually for over a dozen years. And that team actually included my brother, who's on the left there. When I was quite young, I remember this moment when my coach in the middle there, Andrew, taught me to erase the word can't from my vocabulary. I was always much smaller than other climbers, and I couldn't necessarily do things the way others did. So I think from a young age, I was kind of forced to think creatively and to creatively problem solve. And I think that's kind of helped lead me through my life to this day. So 20 years later, and I'm still climbing. The last 4 or 5 years or so, I've really been focusing on the adventure side of climbing, and it's taken me to some pretty awesome places. This was in China in December. To some really cold places too. This is in the Rockies in Canada, in Alberta.
Isn't that what Canada looks like, sir?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, all the time. -20, great. And then here's a photo from our backyard in Squamish. So how did I get into design? Well, actually my mom planted the idea of industrial design when I was a kid. I've always been really artistic, and I've always enjoyed making things with my hands. I could be entertained really easily. Like if you gave me like a few twist ties, I'd fashion them into earrings or something like that within a few minutes. So it's always kind of busy. And I also loved problem solving, and I loved the challenge, both in climbing and in design. But it was actually climbing that led to my design career in outdoor. And it was after this competition, actually, specifically, I got a sponsorship by Arc'teryx, and that led me to start job shadowing. So the funny thing is actually the first harness I built was when I was job shadowing as an athlete. It was bright green and it was super cool, and I had to unpick a few sections, but I thought it was safe enough. But I think the legal team didn't think so, because they wouldn't let me wear it after I finished it. You know, boring reasons like potential death. But since then, I've gotten a lot better at sewing and building, and I recently started designing harnesses a few years ago. So from job shadowing to studying industrial design, that took me to work, well, started me working as a design assistant for Leaf, which is a collection under Arc'teryx, or a category beside Arc'teryx, rather. So I can only see a few faces here, but I was going to ask who here is familiar with Arc'teryx?
Yeah, a little bit.
Awesome. So we're a Canadian company that makes technical, high-performance climbing, skiing, and alpine outdoor equipment. So we're really fortunate that we have the mountains in our backyard, and this gives us lots of access to testing. We're maybe best known for Gore-Tex jackets these days. You can see our little logo there, that bird skeleton. It was actually the first dinosaur to fly. But we also make a really broad range of other product too. So the company actually started with a harness design, and it was gear that kind of brought us into the market. Our team is made up of a mix of industrial designers, apparel designers, and a whole bunch of self-taught folks actually. So there's this huge knowledge base, and we tend to take a design approach to everything we do. Really at the heart of what we do is this just make it attitude. We're always making gear, testing on ourselves and our friends. Every designer has their own sewing machine and a big table, and it gets really messy like in this picture. But you know, sometimes something good comes of the chaos and the mess, and we're able to come up with some things we're proud of. So I'd say two of the unique skills that Arc'teryx is well known for are one, our construction. We really excel at creating new processes and new materials and new tooling. Actually, when I first started, I was working on glove design, and I'd never made a glove before. So I was learning how to, sew these tiny little seam allowances. And not only that, we were creating our own tooling so that we could seam tape and then press those seams. And why would we go to so much effort? Well, if you tape those seams and add a lot of articulation, you don't have to over grip when you're holding an ice axe. So the next thing here is patterning and fit. We've always really focused on ergonomics and an understanding of movement. When I got my first shipment as an athlete, I think I got a lot of jackets. That was all that would fit me because I was pretty small. And what was so cool about this jacket was when I put it on, it felt like I had complete freedom of movement. And if you took that jacket off and you put it on the ground, you would see that there's so much shaping built into it. You couldn't lie it flat because there's all this articulation built into the seams. So that's something we've really tried to champion and bring into our gear. So over the past 7 years or so, I've designed a range of products, everything from down mittens to packs, wallets to courier bags. And without further ado, we have harnesses. So climbing harnesses have a pretty important role, basically to save you from dying. From the 60s through 80s, climbing harnesses were mostly made of webbing. Actually, this one in the corner there, it's made of rope. And I think designers at the time, they were just trying to figure out like these basic geometries, like how can we make climbing safer? And how could we position people so that when they fall, they don't, swing over and hit their head. So essentially, how could we create something that makes climbing safe so you don't die every time you fall? And when I first started climbing, I think I had a harness that was not too dissimilar from this one on the right, that bottom webbing one. So then in comes Arc'teryx, about 10 minutes from where I grew up. And the very first product that launched them was a climbing harness. So on the left here, we have the Vapor harness. And what was so cool about this harness at the time was it was the first thermoformed harness on the market. So Arc'teryx designers took a bunch of different materials, fleece and foam and glue and fabric, and laminated them all together, heated them, and formed them over an IKEA waste paper basket. And that's how they got that shape.
Katie, they came in wild colors too, didn't they? Do you remember?
Yeah, some neon pinks.
I had one of these. They finally made me retire it because it was so old.
Maybe it's time.
Yeah, really wild. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, all good. So the next generation of harnesses use this technology called warp strength. And what was really cool about these harnesses was that they're thin and flat and packable, but not uncomfortable. And that was because the load was distributed across a broad width. So that leads us into the sequence harness, the new harness we just launched.
Huh?
So the first thing I'll talk about is actually geometry. If you hold up a common belt, you'll notice that there's actually some curvature to it. And that's because our bodies are conical. But up until this point, warp strength technology hasn't been. In this image, you can see actually like the guts of a harness. So in the top, we have the first generation of warp, then the second generation, and then the third generation below it, the sequence harness. And what's special about warp, here I'll give you another little example here, is we've taken webbing, we've used the warp yarns, the yarns that run along in this direction, removed the weft that runs this way, and that allows you to distribute the yarns across a broad spectrum. So it remains structural, but also provides more comfort. But until this point, as I mentioned, it's always been straight, and that's because it's quite complicated to work with. It also, was already groundbreaking at the time, and so what we've done is taken it a step further by allowing it to fit the body better. So a very simple idea, quite hard in execution, because you have to get rid of that volume somehow.
Mhm.
So hanging in a harness is often the most uncomfortable part of climbing. You can be suspended for 40 minutes in your harness like this guy. And it's usually a little bit less blissful than how he looks in the photo. And you can also be yanked up by your crotch, like constantly while your partner who's up above you is falling. But until now, we treated most bodies equally. And what we realized in this process is it works for many, but it doesn't work for all. In the industry, there's this term that kind of gets my toes curling, pink it and shrink it. And it's challenging because, the idea is that women, if you want to make a women's product, you just take a men's product, make it pink, and you make it smaller. But women aren't little men, and that sort of thinking doesn't really work today. So I think this is an area where Arc'teryx has actually done a really good job. In the industry, I think there's some room for improvement. So as I mentioned before, when I started digging into research, I found that though our previous harnesses had actually become an icon and were great for a lot of people, this wasn't the case for everyone. So we actually started with our women's harness design first. As our first female harness designer, it just made sense. I saw things that weren't working for me, and I wondered if others had the same experience. Was it just me, or was this in my head? Now, a little side note, my main climbing partners over the past bunch of years have been 6-foot men. And we spend a lot of time together and have had a lot of adventures together. And I find myself fascinated constantly by our similarities and differences. Whether it's, cold, pain tolerance, our physical ability, the length of our stride, how much we sweat. And so I've always wondered that, is it a gender difference or a biological difference or what? Because sometimes it's unexpected where the similarities lie. But in this case, it turns out I wasn't alone, and other people felt the same way I did. As feedback came in, we found that more groups of women, and particularly smaller people, were experiencing pinching in the inner thigh of the leg loop, and they're quite vocal about it. Some climbers said, that's just how a harness feels, but others thought that it could be improved, and we wanted to figure out how and why.
Cool.
So why do we care so much about fit? Well, fit is really critical to the comfort of a climbing harness. It's worn so closely to the body. And for most climbers, comfort in a harness is hands down the most important. A close second to safety. Like pain though, comfort can be really subjective. And I think this led to some really interesting design challenges and realizations along the way. The other thing too is my past is in designing backpacks. I'd never designed a harness before. And for a backpack, you only need to fit like the top half of your body. So it was pretty interesting to realize that, when you're designing a harness, you need to fit the bottom half as well as the top half. And there's a really broad range of geometry when you start looking at connecting those parts together. So best way to start this project, build myself a harness and go to Yosemite. Of course, right? Maybe not quite so fun as designing vacuum cleaners, but anyhow, this is actually the very same stomping grounds as Free Solo, if anybody's seen that. Amazing place to go climb. And a few weeks after this trip, I started mapping my bruises to see what I could learn. There's really no handbook for designing harnesses. So along the way, we had to figure out our own language for understanding comfort and determining what factors would lead us down the right paths so we could provide a broader range of comfort for a broader range of bodies. So that was the beginning of a lot of conversations about comfort and fit. So across a range of ages, body types, body shapes, physiologies, and we noticed that these body type differences have a huge impact on how much the edges of the harness load. Here's my spitball buddy, Cam, a biomechanical engineer turned pro skier who we hired on to help out with this project. And it was awesome working with him. He was a ton of fun, and we would, banter back and forth about the problems we were trying to solve and different ways we could approach it. It was really fun, just like, smashing our heads together and having like these different backgrounds come in. And then here's Tom. Tom's a senior designer at Terex, and he's a wealth of knowledge. And here he's demonstrating angle of the dangle. We actually, Cam and I came up with this new Gmail for field testing called angleofthedangle@gmail.com. And the password was does it pinch. We thought it was clever. But anyhow, we started developing our own tools to understand and quantify comfort. So we looked at things like anthropometry, pressure mapping, pull testing. We broke a lot of harnesses to figure out what would be safe. And we fit on a broad range of people. So over 80 people we had helping us with lab testing and field testing. We built tons and tons of samples and just got them on people and asked them how it felt. So one of my favorite people at Arc'teryx once said, he's got hips that would make an old Hollywood starlet jealous. And that just goes to say that it's not about gender, it's about your body type. So there are many men who have longer rises or thicker thighs due to more muscle or not, and women who are the inverse. I have the same size thigh circumference as Tom in that previous photo, and he's 6 foot something and I'm not. So the results was 2 fit profiles. We ended up with a shaped fit and a narrow fit. So here in this image, you can see we have this Swami, which is the waist belt, and this is actually the shaped fit. So it's got more of a cruiser bike handlebar sort of shape going, not very specific. And what that's for is it wraps up around the iliac crest, like the hips, and then down over to meet the belay loop. Some groups of people tend to wear their harness much higher, and so you just need a different shape because it's sitting in a different part of the body. The narrow fit, however, has a more banana-shaped Swami, and that sits a little bit lower and hugs the iliac crest. As for the leg loop, we found by adding a more conical shape, we could accommodate the range in body circumference and minimize the edge pinching. So if you imagine, if you can see my hand here, if this is the inside of your thigh and that's your groin, we also changed the geometry. So instead of doing this, if this is a leg loop, when you fall, it now does this. So it kind of bridges that gap. We also kind of cut away the groin part of the harness in a kind of C shape so that it would reduce pinching in that area. And it was funny because we actually did that for women originally, and what was good for women happened to be good for men as well. Yeah, there's some sensitive bits there that we don't really want to pinch. So I actually found this article last week when I couldn't sleep, and I thought it was really interesting because it kind of summed this up really nicely. Here it is, a little quote. So averages don't tell us much about differences because they neglect how widely the data are spread. And this seems really obvious, but it's all in that standard deviation, that's what really matters. So it got me really questioning, like, well, why are we designing stuff for men and designing stuff for the average women when really there's such a broad range within sexes, let alone across? And then you add in, body composition and pain tolerance, and you realize it's really not about body type at all, or it's really not about gender at all, but body type instead. So just a little quick example, I actually wear the men's extra small sequence because I have a shorter rise, the distance between my waist belt, my leg loops, and a narrower thigh. We also designed a new gear loop. These were the old gear loops. There are a couple different sizes. And what I really wanted to do was equalize gear loops across sexes. I guess the main point here is that men and women typically have the same gear needs. Women don't carry less than men, so why do we have smaller gear loops? But I can understand the challenge because in the smaller sizes, you have less real estate. You just don't have the room. And so by having two sizes, you could kind of grade out the difference. But what we really wanted to do was create one universal gear loop that fits everybody. So we developed a new gear loop that has a larger racking space. You can clip more gear to it. And it's thinner and it's stiffer and it's lighter. And it's actually simpler for the user. There's less moving parts. So that's the Sequence harness.
Wow.
So we've got warp string technology helping to distribute the loading along the body instead of having individual pieces of webbing that you can feel. We've got anatomy specific fit profiles to provide a greater range of fit and to reduce that pinching along the edge. We have a new gear loop design. I can get nerdy about that later, but it's a dual shot injection molded piece that actually has a little bit of a kickoff, so it sits a little bit off your body. It's easier to clip. And new leg loop shaping.
Wow. Very cool.
Thanks.
When will these come out?
Well, that's perfect timing here. These are actually in production right now. So we've actually launched it as men's and women's, but as we all know now, it's not about your gender that matters, but it's about your body type. So here you can see there's two different shape profiles. One is slightly more conical. There's a bit of an angle around the hips, or the iliac crest rather. And then the other one's a bit more straight. And the differences are really subtle, but you can feel the difference. And I think that's because when you're suspended by a harness, it kind of compresses your body. And so another little example here, my brother has the same size thigh circumference when we're standing, but when we're hanging in a harness when we're loaded, like my tissue kind of just gets out of the way, and then we end up having the same size, like hanging circumference. So it really depends on your body composition and your muscle mass or fatty tissue mass. And generally, these subtle differences are enough. So just to conclude here, what I'm really excited about is that this is just the start. This project built a really solid fit foundation, and we already use this for a range of other projects. I strongly believe that we can take gender bias out of design in more places than we think, that results in solutions that benefit everybody. So I think my one ask for this room here is that we choose to design for the less serviced group first in order to change the way we think about things and really challenge our assumptions to hopefully create a future that's better for everyone. So that's it. Thanks so much for your attention, everybody. Really keen to hear about your experience and challenges designing for a more inclusive range of people. And I think I'll pass you on to Herman for questions.
Dude, very cool. Thank you so much, Katie. I think that's, coming from a male position, I tend to design for myself, and it's true. I can see what happens where if prior to you, there's a lot of male, they're all male designers, and they're pick it and shrink it, they wouldn't understand that perspective. But I think that's really inspiring to think not about yourself as you design, but think about your audience, and not just think about what you said, which is think about the primary audience, think about other audiences, because there's not just one primary audience. It could be female, male, it could be so many things. And when you go down those avenues, you learn so much more. So thank you. This is amazing talk.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, that's it's funny. You've solved a bunch of things that a lot of us didn't even ask the questions on, right? You got way ahead of it, because now that I've heard what you had to say about it and looked at stuff, I realize it's absolutely true. And actually, you can see in a heartbeat with the new harness how some of that is really advantageous. They're going to be fantastic. I'm very excited.
A really, really beautiful color use too. Yeah, definitely. I love. It's very modern. In fact, actually, Jason Morris, do you want to just come online and ask your question? I know it's a simple question, but I'd love to see your face or hear your voice.
Sure. Am I audible?
Yep, I can hear.
Okay. So I teach design at Western Washington in Bellingham, and we talk about color and designing for color and in different markets and segments, and how is some of that decision made within your own company about selecting colors and selecting, whether it's fashion or whether it's male, female, or age? What are some of those considerations?
Well, I can give you a little bit of insight into that. We actually have a massive color team. So it's a little bit unique in that our designers don't typically tackle the color design, but we do provide input. So generally input from our designers is going to be function focused, user focused. So things like inside this belay loop, there's actually a neon orange piece of material. And when you wear through this, because of friction, you'll start to see that bright orange pop. So that one's kind of an obvious one. It needs to be functional. But for this harness also, it was a very intentional decision to make it black with a color pop gear loop. And the reason for that was that we wanted it to be inclusive for all genders, all people. So we didn't want the more shape style to be the pink one, or so we could kind of provide more choice for the audience.
Okay, yeah, it's good to know that you have a team just working on color.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, there's a ton of logistics involved in that too, because they're doing all the dipping and the sampling, and I'm not sure how many people, so I might get this wrong, but it's over 10 people handling this. So quite an involved process with the design team and with marketing to try and cater to different geographical needs. And we try to not follow trends, but be ahead of them, as I think most people would want to be. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. It feels like Arc'teryx, I mean, the color selection is incredible, because I really do like everything that's developed. It's very modern, but knowing a little bit of back end, it feels like the team also dives into like sustainability. It's not very visible, but there's a lot of nuances about, providing the best, absolutely best quality and most sustainable items and the highest performance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say each team has a slightly different approach depending on their role and their piece in the puzzle, because we each have different responsibilities and different areas that we can really contribute and have an impact. So I'm actually working on our sustainable design roadmap as well. And it's been a really interesting process, kind of figuring out, well, what will be our high impact areas and what can we really tackle first? And also, what have we done already that is working really well? And I think part of that is designing for longevity. It's really built into our brand, into our brand DNA, to design things that last. And so you definitely need to look into the material impacts as well. But I think those in tandem, I think are really powerful.
So I'm gonna pass the next question to Ginger, and I encourage anyone else to ask questions or even throw out a topic if y'all want to chat about it. It's open conversation. So Ginger.
Yeah, so thank you for the presentation. It was really cool. And I really liked seeing how far your background went with rock climbing. And so that reminded me of how recently I read that inclusive design for many objects started out as like a sort of a love letter to something, or someone caring so deeply about something that they needed to change the paradigm around that object. Do you think that someone who didn't have the same passion for rock climbing could have accomplished what you did with this harness? And furthermore, like if we're to be more inclusive about what we're designing, are we required to kind of have that person or that team made up of people who really love this thing?
That's a really great point. I love that. I think it certainly helps, because when you're excited about it, you want other people to be excited about it too. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, is like, how to inspire a team and how to encourage people to kind of follow the ideas and make them happen. Because I know for me in the past, I've sometimes struggled with like, too many ideas and not being able to like choose one to kind of progress. But with this one, it just came naturally. It wasn't any struggle because I was interested in it and because I wanted to see this happen for other people. So I think having those relationships with a ton of different climbers and a broad range of people with different backgrounds really helped kind of inspire this project. So I'd say certainly helps. It's a leveler. Like you can be, you know, any height, any body type, like any background, and all you need to do is have the interest in getting on top of this rock. So it's a really supportive community, and I think that's something that's really needed now and into the future.
Cool.
Yeah.
I love that the questions keep on coming in. So this is really great. I want to mention that Jesse VDN Carson, thanks for shifting the shrink it and pink it paradigm, Katie. Congrats on this great work. So thanks for that comment, Jesse. I'm going to now keep on going in order. Thomas.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks. I think this is incredible. I think this is such a beautiful example of like forgetting all preconditions and you asking, I mean, you didn't go in and say it's an inclusive problem. You actually had the courage to say like, these things are not comfortable. So you went just back with like, okay, let's create a blank sheet. And what is the problem? And I think it's just beautiful to see that you kind of took all the weight and all the waste away that you knew about this and started from scratch and solved the problem, and then found out that, hey, this is not about gender. This is about bodies. And I think there's like a lot to learn to that, to like, for every designer to like, yeah, hey, just don't forget, like, what's the problem and what are we trying to do? And are we starting at the right point, or are we starting like all the way in already? So thank you for that. I think that's super inspiring and important. What popped up in my head is when you talked about like materials, and I saw the messy, like your messy room to check out stuff. I was wondering how you get to like innovative materials, and if there is like, if Arc'teryx also sometimes just writes down requirements like, hey, I need a material that does this, this, and that, and works with companies to actually like proactively innovate on these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think one thing that is kind of special is that we have a really strong materials team. And so we work collaboratively, design and materials together to create new materials to work with. So oftentimes design will have the context of use really dialed, and they'll understand, you know, the user and how it needs to work and function. And materials has kind of the material science background. So we work together to kind of like blend those abilities. Yeah, I'd say like it's a bit of back and forth. Sometimes like it's like chicken and egg where it starts.
Yep, always is, yeah.
But it is fun because we do get to create new materials. So we're not, you know, looking through a catalog and just choosing ones that are already made. We get to say like, hey, we want something like this, but it needs to be more durable, more air perm, you know, 10% lighter, whatever it needs to be. And then we work with textile partners to develop that into something that we feel meets our needs. And we do have some pretty good like testing facilities too at the office just down the road. So we're, you know, constantly like working with materials and running them through machines and creating new machines to test them in really weird ways, or just, you know, like leaving a piece of fabric on the sunroof for, you know,
Man, I think you have the
to see how UV affects it.
It does sound like the best job ever, and
It's good fun. I do like it. I can't.
Thank you, Thomas. I'm gonna, Jason, I'm gonna come back to your question. I think it's a great one. I want to jump into Phoebe or Phoebe C, because you got two.
Ooh.
Phoebe?
I can look at the chat too if that's better.
Sure. I'll read you the question, unless Phoebe you jump on. You can interrupt me anytime. I have two questions. What is ARC doing to further plus sizing in harnesses, but also in apparel? And what is the reasoning for marketing the fit styles as men and women's? Great question. So we'll start with the first, which is, again, what is ARC doing to further plus sizing in harnesses, but also in apparel? Ooh, sorry, my sound isn't working. No worries, Phoebe. Thanks for trying.
So I'd say like, yeah, probably like 3 words. We're working on it in terms of a range of sizing. It's definitely something top of mind. I think we all know it's impossible to design, you know, one size fits all. With harnesses, I have to say it's not our top volume product. So, you know, you always have to have a business case and to be able to challenge that. And so that's something we're working on. And we have, we work quite closely with our fit and grading team. And so that's something that I think there's some strong members in the team who are really pushing. So I'm pretty excited to see how the next few years pan out.
Cool. And then the second question, or that was answering the second two, or what was the reasoning for marketing the, oh, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
What was the reasoning for marketing the fit?
So yeah, I think we definitely see the need for it. And I think it's just a matter of building a cross-functional team to really kind of champion this forward.
I have a follow-up question to this specifically. I don't climb, but just, you know, with the different profiles for the different body types, what does Arc'teryx provide any guidance when doing a fit test to find the right harness to climbers about which one it is? Because it's not like I go online and say, hey, I'm a men's medium, I think, right? Like
Yeah.
I mean,
I have so many ideas about this. I probably won't be able to get into all of them here, but I think there's a long way to go with that, and that goes, you know, across gear and apparel and a lot of other items as well. Right now we do have like a size chart, so you can look at the size and kind of see where you fit, but it's going to vary depending on where you wear your harness. And also currently we have, you know, one buckle, and so if you're on the max end of the range, like you're like well sucked in, your gear loops are going to be off center, and that matters when you're like hanging off a rock, trying to like grab your gear and it's like behind you. So that's something we actually looked at, was kind of trying to adjust that range so gear doesn't fall into your lap, and ice screws don't tear up your pants, but they're, you know, in the right spot so that you can access them.
cool. Yeah, I know that feels like
online that helps with like, yeah, finding the right harness for you.
cool. Thanks, Gary. Back to Jason, and Jason Morse.
Yeah, I was just curious I was looking on the Arc'teryx website, and what other products that you design or have designed or are working on categories.
Yeah, so I've designed gear across all categories within Arc'teryx. So, you know, that takes us from everyday to leaf to valence, our kind of high-end men's fashion line, but all under the guise of gear and equipment. So I don't really design much apparel aside from like, I worked a little bit on a vest that was kind of like a pack. So like sort of merging the two. But I think what's out there right now would be, the Macas, the Blanca, the Sling Blade, the Breeze backpacks, you know, the Leaf Courier, a bunch of gloves, the Valence wallet. So like a mixed bag of stuff. Some down mittens, those are fun. Yeah, it's fun. I kind of like mixing it up. I think I would probably get bored quite easily if I was doing the same thing again and again. And I'm really fortunate that each product has a different like use scenario. And so we have to kind of, you know, accommodate that with a different palette of materials and a different way of putting them together.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
Very cool. Thanks, Jason. Oh, all right. So we've got Joe. Joe, you want to come on?
Is my audio working?
Yeah. Hey, Joe.
Hey, so I was just wondering if you have any advice for a female that wants to like move into the outdoor sports industry, or if you feel like you've been really like welcomed because you are a different voice, I guess, in your experience.
Yeah, so I think I've been really fortunate in that I've never felt that, yeah, my gender, my sex stopped me from doing things I wanted to do. And so I think here I've had a lot of like female mentors and male mentors, and it hasn't really been too much of a challenge. I'd say if you have some interest and have some ideas, just go out and get them. Kind of cheesy, but I don't think you need to do anything really that differently. I think kind of all the same stuff, you know, building your network, learning a lot about the companies you're interested in. And if you have ideas, you know, just make them and get them in front of people and get other people excited about them, like just as excited as you are.
Sweet, thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks, Joe. Any other questions? Anyone can speak up. You don't need to be on the chat.
I've got a question. For your panel of people that did the fit testing, you mentioned like 80 different participants.
Mm-hmm.
Did you track or document their body measurements and the ergonomics like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We did a lot of measurement taking and kind of unconventional measurement taking too, because some of these things aren't standard things that you typically measure. And we also kind of dug into previous research and studies. Cam handled more of that side because of his background, and then kind of worked together to better understand who we had in front of us. And we were surveying mainly climbers because we generally wanted to fit like the majority of climbers who are already partaking in the sport, and then also be, you know, creating silhouettes or profiles that are welcoming to a bunch of new climbers as well. So kind of looking at that range, and some of the changes that came from that was making the women's or the, you know, the shaped harness have a larger thigh circumference, because we found that a broad group of women just needed a different size, and that went for men with larger thighs too.
Right. Have you guys worked with any of the high performance engineering fibers like Spectra or Dyneema fibers in climbing?
Yeah, definitely played around with a broad range of stuff. There can be like technical challenges depending on what you're doing with materials. So sometimes, like for example, with our Vectran backpacks, those ones enabled us to construct them in a certain way because of the medium.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Lovely work. It's great seeing the whole process, and especially like even marking on your own body. I thought that was brilliant.
Well, thanks. Gloves too, and it didn't work so well.
Yeah, like really.
I don't know what I'm doing, but
Yeah, I mean, you got to make up your solutions in some way. So that
yeah.
Charting your bruises, I thought, was a moment of brilliance there. So.
I have to add, when I was doing that testing, I was doing a lot of big wall climbing. For anyone who doesn't climb, it's when you're hanging, basically, yeah, you might be spending nights on the wall because it's really high. So I was hauling a lot of weight, and that's kind of why I was getting that exacerbated like bruising.
Right.
So I often found that like taking things to the extreme kind of helps make those nuances more visible.
Yeah. Definitely.
I do have a question. Like, I'm really curious how you stress test those harnesses, and don't tell me you go out to Yosemite.
Do you mean durability testing or safety
Yeah,
testing?
no, I'm just like, man, like your life depends on that like one seam, and like that just makes me so nervous. Whereas like, yeah, it's
This is one that's been very stress tested. It's like a heap, but we do a lot of safety testing before these harnesses go out. And so there's a standard that it needs to meet. There's essentially two tests that I can describe. So, you know, one is pull testing the Swami. So, you know, it gets loaded over a cylinder, and that gets pulled to, I believe, 10 kilonewtons. So 225 pounds being 1 kilonewton. And then there's another test where it's loaded on a mannequin, and the belay loop is pulled, and that's pulled to 15 kilonewtons, like repeatedly. So these things are pretty darn safe. Like, you know, if your body is experiencing those loads, you're probably going to be in 4 pieces. So usually that's like enough. But I always do like want to double check when we get out to other testers, because if it's me, that's one thing. If it's someone else, then we like, you know, make sure we check all boxes and do it twice.
Man, I hope you check all boxes for yourself too. So.
So with 2 minutes left, I'm gonna I'd love to applaud you, Katie, but before we do that, I want to get everyone ready to applaud. I'm going to do a shameless plug. Again, for Forum, if we're always at ESA Seattle, we're always working for new topics. If you want to present, or if there's a topic you want to do, please reach out to any of us at the board. Stay connected with us via Facebook, Instagram, and we're also on LinkedIn, I think. And if there's other ways that you prefer, let us know too. Again, our goal is just to create a more unified community, especially through this this interesting time. We do, so for September, have some, it's going to be packed. We've been working hard. And so first of all, there's the IDC, which is an International Design Conference hosted by IDSA International. And that happens on September 14th. It's a 24-hour live stream around the world. So it should be really inspirational. Additionally, we have another forum just like this coming up with Sophie. Sophie, well, shoot, Scott, do you want to do a quick 30 seconds on it?
Oh yeah, sure. So we have Sophie Wong. She's a local maker, designer, and she'll be talking about her making process and kind of the projects that she's worked on. So yeah, pretty excited to have her as well. So that'll be towards the second half of September.
Awesome, thanks, Scott. And very finally, so it's almost week to week, we've got a sketch jam that our chair is going to be hosting, Anthony, and it's just like not even talking. Let's just design and sketch some fun shit, to be honest.
Yeah, let's just have some fun and draw around. Yeah, I think I got a pretty fun design prompt hooked up, and it'll be, you know, super quick, super brief, and we'll do some drawing together, and we'll share them and talk about them, and then break from there.
Cool. Very finally, we're working on another forum with panelists talking about travel and the impacts of the pandemic. So far, like there may be 3 panelists: Airbnb, Alaska Airlines, Teague. They're all interested in joining us, so we're just sorting those things out. So month of September will be really great. But back to you, Katie. Thank you so much again for your time and really putting your heart and soul into this, telling us a story and actually doing some amazing work. I'm gonna go in gallery view, and if everyone can just give her a clap, a round of applause, please. Well deserved.
Thanks so much, Herman, and thanks to the team. My pleasure.
Awesome. All right, that concludes the forum. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for putting it together. Awesome.
See you.